Welcome to the Pot.Live podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G. This podcast is all about connecting the community with the thought leaders of business and entertainment in the cannabis industry. As this industry expands and becomes more and more mainstream, we want to educate and entertain our listeners and become your choice and voice for all things cannabis. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. Listeners, are you looking for the only one-stop online platform in the cannabis industry? Then you have to check out MJ.com. MJ has it all. Medical and professional news and trends. Get your medical card. Over 150 free workouts for your health and fitness. VIP membership. 2 different gaming apps to win cash and prizes. Find your local dispensaries. Learn about the latest strains and search for your career in the marijuana industry. And don't forget to get your favorite lab-tested CBD products delivered straight to your front door. It's all at MJ.com. Welcome to another episode of the Pot.Live podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G, and today's special guest, Nick Kovacevich, the CEO of KushCo Holdings. KushCo Holdings has sold over 1 billion ancillary devices in the CBD and cannabis industry, and he's going to explain everything they do. We're going to talk about the cannabis industry as a whole, going through this crisis. We're recording this in the time of the corona crisis, if you will. So, Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So why don't you give everyone a little background of, I guess, first tell us what KushCo Holdings is, and then we'll dive into your personal background a little bit.
Sounds good. KushCo Holdings is a publicly traded company. We're traded on the OTC under the symbol KSHB. And we went public in 2016 as a packaging provider to the emerging cannabis industry. And since then, we've expanded our offering to include really 4 main buckets. So we still have packaging that we offer to businesses that operate in cannabis and CBD. We also we're one of the largest sellers of vape products, and we sell these small vape devices empty. Our brands that we service then fill them with oil, and they end up on the shelves in the dispensaries. We also sell gas and solvents, which is stuff like ethanol and butane and propane, which is used to extract cannabis oil. So we're shipping tanks of those gas products to cannabis processing labs. And then we also offer some services, and we're doing a lot for CBD customers because it is federally legal. We're helping them get access to major mainstream retail outlets. Obviously, everyone's looking for more channels to be able to sell their products, and so we're proud to be offering retail services to this same group of customers. So we do a few different things across the spectrum, but all centered around adding value and providing products and services to businesses that operate in the cannabis and CBD sector.
Sure. So I know, during this crazy time that we're in right now, how is your company adapting to this kind of crisis with everybody, in different states staying at home, business being halted? Some businesses are essential, some are not. How are you guys adapting at the moment?
Yeah, we are, we're highly dynamic. So we're taking it day by day, but we've made some serious adjustments already. One of the first things that affected us is as an importer of goods from China, the virus originally broke out in China and kept workers out of the factories for an additional 3 to 4 weeks. And as a result, most shipments of product have been delayed on average 4 to 6 weeks from when we were originally expecting to get them. So that delay obviously is something that we had to deal with, right? And we luckily had enough stock product, but coordinating and prioritizing and ensuring that we're getting those goods as soon as they're available from China is something we've been working on over the last several months. And outside of that, now you turn to the U.S., and I think people think about that supply chain disruption as being bigger than it is. It really is only 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, those factories are back and running at near full capacity. So we expect that issue to be over with very soon here, as we have goods leaving China all during the month of April. So we can hopefully move on from that and focus more on what's happening on the ground here in the U.S. And certainly our industry has been very lucky to be deemed essential in almost every market, with the exception of maybe Massachusetts banning adult use here for a couple of weeks. Outside of that, it's been very positive. So really something that the industry needed was to continue to stay in business. And I think consumers obviously need these goods, which is why it's being deemed essential. So companies like us that support the industry, we're allowed to continue to stay open, but we're taking all the necessary precautions. We've allowed anyone who can work at home to work from home. We have a skeleton crews in the warehouses shipping goods. We have masks, we have gloves, we're keeping social distance. So we're literally doing everything we can. Fortunately, have yet to have any incidents of COVID within our organization that we're aware of. So that's great news, and hoping to continue to have it that way. Hoping to continue to be able to service our customers, which we're able to do. And our customers are also seeing some spikes in business as folks are rushing to stock up on these goods, going into lockdown. They're going to be at home. They want to have cannabis products around, whether it's for medicinal or adult use purposes. So we're actually seeing an increased demand, which is also a bright spot. But we know things can change quickly, so we're monitoring daily. We're continuing to use best practices. And one of the things that's different is with everyone working from home, we're streamlining communication to make sure that the entire organization is in the same loop when it comes to what's happening in the marketplace and what the company is doing to combat this coronavirus exposure.
Great. Well, I'm glad everything, is going so far so good for your company. That's great to hear. So let's dive into a little bit of your background personally. Can you share with us basically the story of what brought you to this specific career path?
Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've started several businesses with one of my business partners, primarily, who we actually went to high school together. And we've been friends for a long time, and he's been highly entrepreneurial, was even running a DJ business while in high school. And, in college, he started a business, which I then got involved in after college. We exited that business, and we took the proceeds to start Kush, which at the time was called Kush Bottles. Now we've changed the name to KushCo Holdings. But Kush Bottles, we started almost 10 years ago. We started in December of 2010. We had an idea of wanting to be in this industry for a couple of reasons. Number one, we believe in the industry. We believe the products should be available, especially for medical purposes, but also for adults' choice. And we saw that was going to probably head that direction. So we knew there was going to be a lot of growth opportunity. And number two, we were a couple of young entrepreneurs. And, if you're going to go into business, you don't want to go into an industry where, there's been an established group of players that have been doing it for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Better to go into a new emerging industry where you're one of the only folks that's jumping in early, and you've got an advantage of being a first mover. So it just made sense. And we started the company. We built it out organically using our own money to a certain point. And, that kind of brings me to my story personally. Along the way, we had been doing some other things. We started another company called Big Rents, which is in the construction equipment rental industry, but it's more of a technology platform model, similar to an Uber, Airbnb for construction equipment. That business was doing extremely well. We were in the top 50 fastest growing companies in the country. So my partner and I were spending a little bit more time over there. And lo and behold, as we were considering what to do with Kush bottles, Colorado legalized for adult use, and we saw a huge spike in demand. In fact, we went from 20,000 in sales to over 1 million the next year in Colorado, just because of this legislative windfall. So we quickly thought, well, gosh, now we've got two businesses that are doing really well. What are we going to do? And that's when we decided that my partner Dallas would stay on as the CEO of Big Rents and run that company. I would then take a full-time role at Kush as the CEO, and that was in September of 2014. So I've been the CEO, even though I'm one of the founders, I've only been the CEO since 2014. And part of my job was to really accelerate the growth of the business and to get the company publicly traded, which we were able to accomplish both of those. We went from roughly around $5 to $8 million in sales when I took over in 2014 to last year, where we did close to 150 million in sales for the fiscal year. So we grew the business very quickly. And we were able to get the company publicly traded. We've been publicly traded since 2016 on the OTC exchange. And the next goal that we have for the company is to graduate beyond the OTC and actually move to the NASDAQ stock exchange. So still work to be done. I'm still trying to grow the business. But with my entrepreneurial background, I'm a CEO who can adjust to a lot of the dynamic circumstances that we've traditionally faced in cannabis. And now we're all facing in light of the coronavirus. So blessed to be able to bring that skill set and continue to navigate the ship. And there's a lot of obviously future ahead for not only KushCo, but also for the legal cannabis industry as a whole.
That's great. That's a great story. You should be proud of that. So tell everybody out there that's listening, our listener base is very varied. Tell everyone the difference and the pros and cons of being a private company at first and then going public.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of experience as somebody who has started two fast-growing companies, and one of them is private, Big Rents, the other one, KushCo, being public. And there's certainly, pros and cons of both. And I think, most people choose to stay private longer because of the flexibility and, the extra costs that come with going public and corporate governance costs and all that stuff. So typically you don't see companies going public at a young age like we have and many cannabis companies have. But talk about the pros and cons. As a private company, you're going to have more flexibility. You're going to kind of be able to do what you want, and you're not going to have short-term pressures, right? So you can focus more on long-term growth and building the business the right way. Whereas a public company, we have 8 analysts that cover the stock. So, we've got 8 reports out there every quarter that are suggesting we're going to do X or do Y. And, we've got pressure to hit those numbers, right? And to accomplish those goals. And if we do well, the stock goes up. If we do poorly, the stock goes down. So you're really kind of married to your stock price, and that's going to be your ability to raise capital, ability to make acquisitions. Whereas as a private company, you can set your own valuation for the most part, right? If your business was worth X today and you doubled your business in a year, then your business should be worth 2X, right? With the public company, we've grown our business from 8 million in sales to 150 million last year nearly. And our stock's at an all-time low, right? So in the public markets, you're also subjective to, macro circumstances and a lot of dynamics at play. The right strategy for Kush was to go public. And the reason why was because for a cannabis company or a cannabis adjacent company, there was simply no financing available in the private market. So if you wanted to raise outside capital and you wanted to grow your business by injecting capital and you wanted to make acquisitions using your stock as a currency, it was much easier to do as a public company versus a private company. So it was sort of out of necessity, and it ended up being the right decision. But now as we look at, kind of where the stock is traded, you often think, gosh, it sure would be nice to be private. But, I don't think that we're going to turn away at this point. We've done a great job and got this business to where it is. And we've got our goal set on getting the company listed on NASDAQ. And I think we have enough size and scale to justify being a public company. But certainly no one would have looked at us, 4 years ago as a company doing 8 million in sales and said, that company should be public. At the time, it was something that was really forced, just given the dynamics around this industry and the lack of traditional private capital that was available to the industry, and to some extent is still available to the industry, which is why you see in cannabis a lot of companies going public, just as a means to be able to raise enough capital to really grow their business and build out their infrastructure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you touched on all of that, Nick, because the trajectory of all the cannabis stocks, they all shot up to crazy valuations a few years ago, and now they've all come back down, and probably come back down too much because it was an overreaction both ways, most likely. Now that there's kind of that, I hate to use the word negative because it doesn't mean your company's negative, but all of these, even the big 3 in Canada, right? All their stocks came down quite a bit. How do all these public companies get that investor confidence back? Is it a long-term plan to get that investor confidence back? Do you think there's going to be another run-up again at some point when legalization happens? What are your views on that?
Yeah, well, I certainly think there's stuff that can move these stocks up that's legislatively related, right? So if we get some legislation done, federal legalization, certainly, right, you would see a big jump in all these stocks. But outside of that, I mean, what can these companies really control? And I think sustained execution is obviously something that will endear investor confidence. And we're seeing some companies that are really executing well. The problem that a lot of companies have in the U.S. is if you're doing business in the United States whatsoever, then you have a restriction on being able to list your company on a U.S. exchange. And we all know that the greatest capital market system in the world is here in the U.S. and you know, it really tops out at the NYSE and NASDAQ. Those are the premier exchanges. And they simply won't take any cannabis operator that's doing business in the United States. Why? Because cannabis is still federally illegal in the United States. So if we remove that, not only do you have momentum behind the sector, right, because people see future growth and less risk, but you also have the biggest exchanges in the world now opening their doors to cannabis companies. So that's what we ultimately need as an industry. But in the short term, you know, we are seeing some of the U.S. operators really execute. They're growing revenues, they're growing profits. The problem is they're traded on an obscure exchange in Canada called the Canadian Securities Exchange. And most real institutional investors, let's say somebody who manages a pension fund for firefighters or police officers or teachers, they're not going to be able to buy a stock that's listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, especially a stock of a cannabis operator who's technically in violation of federal law. So it's a challenge to get the real institutional capital into these U.S. operators. But as they continue to execute and the valuation becomes more and more compelling, as you mentioned, you know, some might even argue that the values have come too low at this point. Somebody will take the risk and jump in, and there will be a lot of reward to be had for those that do. Now, the other side of the coin is there's Canadian operators that are listed on the NYSE and NASDAQ. And the reason they're able to do that is because they have zero operations in the United States, and all of their operations are in countries where it's fully federally legal. The problem that they're having and why their stocks have come down is they're having challenges in their market. The Canadian market is not very big, and they've been slow to roll out retail stores. And so as a result, these companies that, you know, had very high expectations to do, you know, $200, $300 million a quarter in sales by calendar 2020, you know, they're on pace for probably a third of that on average, right? So people are wanting to see more execution. So on the companies that are listed on the big exchanges that can attract the large institutional capital is, I think, waiting to see more execution. Whereas the companies that are executing well, that have operations in the U.S., they've got a different problem in the sense that they're traded on the Canadian Securities Exchange, and they're really unable to get that capital from the institutional investors, no matter how well they execute. So two problems for two different classes, but ultimately the same result. And across the board, you see cannabis stocks all near their all-time lows or trading below their IPO or RTO price. And it's crazy to see, because the one thing that is becoming more and more clear is that paints a clear contrast and discrepancy between what's actually happening at the consumer market. We know that there are lines 3 times around the block in states like Illinois that just legalized. We know that cannabis consumption is going up every single quarter, higher than it was the quarter before. So you've got this market that's just continuing to gain steam and grow at an incredible pace upward and to the right. And you've got these stocks that are doing the opposite and going downward. So at some point, you would think that discrepancy and discorrelation would find a path to maybe lining up a little bit more closer together, but we'll have to wait and see because every day that goes by, it seems like that disconnect is getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, perfectly said. And you know, I was recently at an event where Kevin O'Leary even spoke and said, you know, there's so much institutional money sitting on the sidelines waiting for legalization in the United States. And yeah, I mean, the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? It's going to happen at some point. It's not going the other way.
Right.
So at some point it's going to happen. We just don't know when. Maybe this crisis leads to a revenue necessity for the government, and maybe it happens sooner than later. Who knows? And we are not qualified here to give investment advice, but you'd think logic would tell you that it's going to happen and these stocks are going to pop at some point, but nobody knows what that time frame is.
Yeah, and I agree. I think certainly the macro is there. And if this thing legalizes, money pours in, and you know what that will do for the stocks. But the question is when, and the question is, could COVID and coronavirus potentially help, right? And I think the answer is yes. You look at these states that are going to be draining their emergency budgets. The federal government just, signed a $2.some trillion package, right? So where's that money going to get replaced, right? We're seeing now record number of job losses, and cannabis as an industry is dollar for dollar, arguably the best job creator versus any other industry, right? Think about it. What other industry do you have a situation where 100% of the product is manufactured right here in the U.S., right? Not to mention, it's a highly manual industry, right? It is yet to be automated. So the industry creates a ton of jobs. The industry creates a ton of tax revenue. And you would think on the back end of this coronavirus that those two things would be increasingly more important to the legislative and government bodies. Now, I say that side of the argument, but also want to say the other side. And the reality is, to some people, that still doesn't even matter, right? A lot of people still have in their mind that cannabis is bad and it should not be legal. And unfortunately, a lot of those people are running our government, and specifically they're in the Senate. And the Senate has blocked every single piece of legislation that's come through, with the exception of the SAFE Banking Act, where they made basically an outlandish request to modify it, which doesn't even make sense, so it's not going to get done. But if the Senate remains in power, the current Senate members remain in power, even though it makes perfect logical sense to legalize cannabis to create jobs and tax revenue, even though a majority as high as 2/3 or even 70% of the United States thinks it should be legal, you still probably won't get the traction because there's people in office that just don't want to hear it and don't really care and are going to do anything they can to continue to block it and keep things the way they are. So November is really all that matters. These other things are all incremental, but it comes down to November and what happens in the elections. And that could reshape the future of the administrations in power, but it could also significantly reshape the timing for some sort of federal legalization for cannabis.
Yeah, I'll be interested to know during, once this crisis is hopefully over and we get back to all the BS politics and debates and all that stuff going on, I wonder if cannabis will become a hot button topic or get pushed to the side because all these other priorities have kind of jumped up. So that'll be interesting, but not to get into a political thing, but let's move on to what's exciting. Let's pretend Corona's over. What's new and exciting coming up this year for KushCo Holdings?
So we're really excited about some of the new stuff we're doing, like the retail services. So we partnered with a multi-billion-dollar company out of Minnesota called CA Fortune. CA Fortune, they represent brands like Kind Bar. They represent Beyond Meat exclusively. They work with Martinelli's, even Pepsi. So they take a lot of premier CPG, mainly food and beverage brands, into all of the mainstream grocery channels. So everyone from Target and Walmart all the way down to smaller brands like Sprouts or Whole Foods. He's not that small, but Natural, you name it, right? So they've got a total of 500,000 doors nationally that they work with. And our partnership with them is simply around the CBD category. So our goal long-term is to have CBD products into all 500,000 of those doors. Now, that's going to take a while because currently only 10% of retailers are even carrying CBD. Now, the reason we wanted to partner with CA Fortune versus doing this ourselves is that we don't have the credibility. None of these CBD brands, our company, going to somebody like Target is going to have the credibility to get them to take this product category on their shelves. CA Fortune, however, because they're a multi-billion-dollar company and because they represent household names like Kind Bar and Beyond Meat, they do have the credibility to hopefully be able to open those doors. Now, one of the things that we're seeing is there's reluctance to carry CBD until the FDA gives its ruling on how they plan to regulate it. So a lot of these retailers are waiting for more clarity, which we know is coming. And we've got the right partner to be able to accelerate penetration into those channels. And this would be gigantic, obviously, for us as somebody who's going to make a small percentage of all of those transactions. But it's going to be big for the whole industry, right? The CBD industry is suffering. Prices have come way down. And what the industry needs is more retail penetration. That gets your volume up. That then supports downstream, the processors, and even the farmers that are growing the hemp. So we got to get these retail channels activated. We're doing it ourselves with some of the smaller conventional C-store, beauty, even pet. We're doing it ourselves with our own resources. And then through our partnership with CA Fortune, we're going to be doing it for the mainstream grocery channels, as I mentioned. So we're really excited to be able to offer that to CBD brands, and we're placing CBD brands right now into hundreds or thousands of doors. So it's going well. Still a lot of work to do, and the end goal is really how do we get CBD to be mainstream in this country and present in virtually every retail channel. And if we can accomplish that, it's going to be very beneficial to our customers, the brands. It's going to be very beneficial to our company, but it's also going to be very beneficial to the whole entire CBD industry, which really needs a lift, given that the dynamics that have played out and the pricing has come way down and the market's been oversaturated and people are struggling to grow sales right now. So we're hoping it can all turn around, and certainly the FDA giving their ruling would just further accelerate and really open this thing up.
Nick, tell everyone where they can find out more information on KushCo Holdings.
Yeah, KushCo.com is our website. As I mentioned, we're publicly traded, so all of our filings are available through the SEC website. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick Kovacevich. And other than that, hopefully there's going to be another podcast at some point they can tune into.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, before we let you go, one quick hit. Give us one thing you're super excited about. And I know you touched on some of this already. A quick hit, something you're super excited about and something that concerns you in the overall cannabis industry.
Well, I think, these businesses being deemed essential really is a game changer because states that have legalized are now looking at, how do we get these products more available? And states that previously didn't allow delivery or curbside pickup are now allowing those in light of the coronavirus. So very excited about more access to product for residents in states that have legalized. And what will that lead to? Will that then lead to allowing for consumption lounges? I mean, when does cannabis get treated at least on par with something like alcohol, where it's available on premise and off premise, right? So I think that's something that really excites me and that we're following. And then, unfortunately, I've talked a lot about this. The biggest issue with the coronavirus, at least at this point, right, it doesn't seem to be very bad for the market. Where it's really going to affect the industry is in the lack of access to capital. As I mentioned, this industry's traditionally needed a lot of capital to fund and grow their businesses. And that capital is getting shut off very quickly. And the coronavirus is something that might be the last straw. We just know that investors are very risk adverse in a climate like this. Cannabis is still a risky industry. So my concern is without capital coming in to a large swath of these businesses, you're going to see a lot of companies go under, file for bankruptcy, et cetera. So it's very unfortunate. And we're hoping that, these companies can really execute and tighten their belts during this uncertain time. But you will see a lot of companies, unfortunately, go out of business. So be prepared for that. But, it's sort of a necessary cycle. And this is still an emerging industry. We're still in the early stages. So, there's going to be these ebbs and flows. We had the initial bull market. We saw everything run up. Now we're in a little bit of a bear market for cannabis. We'll see who can survive. But we know there's going to be another run on the other side. So plenty of more excitement. Again, I think there's some great trends. But unfortunately, we're also going to see some companies go out of business. And all the while, we're continuing to navigate the dynamic waters that we're in, and doing it to the best of our ability to protect everyone's health and safety and make sure that we have high quality products in the marketplace so that consumers can enjoy these goods, whether it's for medicinal or recreational adult use purposes.
Nick Kovacevich, CEO of KushCo Holdings. Thank you so much for taking the time, dropping some wisdom on our audience. We appreciate it very much, and best of luck for the rest of the year.
All right. Thank you. Happy to be on anytime. Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
All right, everyone. We will see you next time on the Pot.Live podcast. If you are into the recreational side of the cannabis industry, yes, stoners, I'm talking to you, then thepot.com is the online and mobile destination for you. That's right, THEPOT.com, thepot.com. Where else can you find the exclusive Pot Made of the Month? Take a pot quiz and win prizes. Scroll through hilarious memes and jokes and check out the latest podcasts, news, and trends, all while having your own profile and voice in the pot.com forum. Visit thepot.com today and get lit.